Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Reese, and I'll be your moderator today. We're going to kick off the session in a couple of minutes. We're just waiting so everyone has a chance to join. In the meanwhile, though, we'd love to hear from you, so let us know where you're joining from using the chat or the comments, depending on what platform you're watching on. And yeah, tell us something that you'd like to get out of today's session. A few bits of housekeeping before we kick off. The session is being recorded, and the recording will be emailed to everyone that's registered for the event already. So if you haven't registered already, then you can scan the QR code on screen now. You can find the link that I've put in the chat, or you can head over to datacamp.com/webinars, and that way we will email you the recording as well as any other resources as well. The format of the session today is a Q&A, but we will be having an audience Q&A as well. So if you have any questions at any point, or if you'd like to ask a follow-up to any of the questions that we cover today, then please let us know in the chat and the comments, and we'll do our best to get those answered as well. Brilliant. I think that's everything from me for the moment. I'll be back to repeat these messages for any new joiners shortly, but until then, enjoy the background music. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Reese, and I'll be your moderator today. We're going to kick off today's session in a couple of minutes or so. We're just waiting so everyone has a chance to join. In the meanwhile, though, we'd love to hear from you, so let us know where you're joining from using the chat, the comments, and yeah, tell us something that you'd like to get out of today's webinar. A few bits of housekeeping for anyone that's just joined. The session is being recorded, and the recording will be emailed to you in the next few days, as long as you've registered. So if you haven't registered already, head over to datacamp.com/webinars, or you can scan the QR code on screen, or you can find the link that I've put in the chat. I'll also post it again very shortly, so you've got it at the top of the feed. Aside from that, if you have any questions during the session at any point, then let us know in the chat and the comments, and we will open it up for the audience Q&A at the end. But yeah, aside from that, keep your eyes in the chat, and I'll be sending resources that are relevant to the session today as well. Brilliant. I'll be back to repeat these messages for any final new joiners shortly, but until then, enjoy the background music. Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Reese, and I'll be your moderator today. We're going to kick off in about 20 seconds or so. We're just waiting so everyone has a chance to join. Let us know where you're joining from. It's always good to see the breadth and the range of people that we've got joining from a variety of locations. So yeah, keep letting us know as you join. For anyone that's just joined, the session is being recorded, and the recording will be emailed to everyone that's registered for the event. If you haven't registered already, scan the QR code, find the link that I've sent in the chat, or you can head over to datacamp.com/webinars. Aside from that, keep your questions coming in throughout the session. If you have any questions at any point, let us know in the comments, and I'll save them for the Q&A that we'll do at the end. And yeah, keep your eyes also in the chat for any resources that I'll send as well. Brilliant. I think that's everything from me. So I'll now hand you over to your host for today's session, Richie. Richie, please take it away.
Welcome to the webinar. This is Richie. Now, a few weeks ago, OpenAI was bragging about how they have 100 million people using ChatGPT and their other products every week. And if you think back a couple of years ago, there was really nowhere near that many people using GPT-3. So the thing that changed in the meantime was this launch of ChatGPT. So just changing the user interface so people didn't have to write Python code anymore. They had a chat tool on a website. Their user base has grown 1,000-fold. It's pretty impressive numbers. And I think in technical data roles, we sometimes get so focused on like, can I make something that works, that we forget other important questions like, is this product actually usable? So today we're going to talk about good design in the context of data and AI. And our guest today is Joanna Pena-Bickley. She's the Chief Design Officer for the Design Core at Design by Us, where she leads a global network of designers. And Joanna is also co-founder and board member of EarthDNA. And she's previously director of product design for Uber Eats. She was head of research and design for Alexa devices at Amazon. And she was the global chief creative officer for IBM. So I'm very excited to hear what she has to say. Welcome, Joanna. Glad to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. So can we start at the beginning? Can you just give me an overview of what does being a designer actually involve?
Absolutely. Well, I can always share it. Most people think design is just a job or it's a career. It's a life. And for me, it's been more than a career. It's also been a calling. And design at its core is intentional problem solving within a set of constraints, right? Sometimes those constraints are price. They can be technological constraints, right? Engineering constraints. They can be the constraints of the expectations of our customers, which I think design spends a lot of time educating themselves on, as well as our favorite constraint, which is time.
Okay.
So if I can like just in a nutshell, design is intentional problem solving, right? It is intentional problem solving within constraints. Without constraints, it's art.
Okay, so that idea of just problem solving with constraints, that sounds very familiar to, I think, anyone who works in data or engineering. It's like, well, you're doing the same kind of thing. It's just you've got this sort of the aesthetic angle to this, I guess. Okay.
That is absolutely one aspect of the angle, right? But the other one is actually the human cognitive science that goes into why people use it, whether or not we've developed the appropriate use cases, and doing the necessary research. I always think about research and design as being yin and yang to each other. Often in companies, they are split apart or they're separate disciplines, but they actually are outgrowth of each other. When you are human obsessed or customer obsessed, it is really incumbent upon the designer that they're not just in service to the corporation. The most important person that they are in service to is the person that they happen to be designing for.
Excellent. Yeah, so it's really got that user focus rather than just, we're trying to hit some metric internally to the company.
Right.
Okay. All right. So just because a lot of the audience here, I think, are data practitioners. So what's like the number one thing you think data practitioners need to know about design?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think that often we see these things as two very different disciplines, when in reality, if technology is your canvas, data is the paint. Let's be very, very clear about the craft that we bring, right? And data in and of itself is very much not just the information that informs why we make a specific design decision, but more importantly, data is also what our customers actually really need from us and how they need it from us. One of the most important things I think about data, right? We know that data powers everything right now. There isn't any experience today in the online, in the mobile world, within VR, even within artificial intelligence. I love to explain it like this to design communities and even communities that are outside of the design world, right? Which is data is the oil, AI is the engine right now, right? That gets to spin through and make sense of the data. Where design comes in, and I think this is a really important, is how do we make that data human and useful? Not all data is the same. We know that, right? I love the old adage that garbage in, garbage out. Well, the same thing goes to say is if you have really bad data in an interface or too much data, you create cognitive overload, which that cognitive overload will immediately lead to decline in usage. So the importance of marrying our disciplines and thinking us as more interdisciplinary is that data is a finite material now that we work with as designers, rather than maybe data is only defining what it is that we design, or a metric that we need to hit that says the design is successful.
Okay, a lot to take in there. I love the idea that like data really is just everywhere in design at the moment. Maybe if we simplify it to like, so I think with data products that or AI products, that generally means software at the moment, or it's the most common sort of thing. So can you talk about like some examples of where data gets used in developing like software, then in the design of software?
Absolutely. Depending on the kind of software that we're talking about, let's talk about financial services. That's my fun one, because no one ever thinks it's sexy, and I think it's the hardest space with the most constraints often in it. And what I love about it is that actually data is the product. How much money you have in your bank account is a data point, right? What your spend trends are over a month or over a week period is a data point. And the most important thing that a designer is going to approach that piece of data is what is the decision that data is actually going to enable in somebody's everyday life? And so I think about it as if data was raw material, we start with that human need, right? That human or that customer need. And you're probably hearing me, I'm not using the word user. I have a firm belief that the word user is a bad word in design. And we have developed people with addictions around usage, rather than thinking about really great design. Embraces our human nature, understands our cognitive science and the dopamine that is released when we create something that requires a like all the time. I think about social media. You asked about what is data material. Social media, the data that is being brought in there is not only the data by which why something shows up in my feed, but also the content in and of itself is data. So when we think about data, it's everywhere. And how we use that to craft or mold an experience that leads to a good outcome for both the customer or the consumer, right? And our businesses, because the two are tied together. Often we think about data as like this fragmented, and it isn't maybe tied to a business outcome, when in fact it is often uniquely tied to a business outcome, as is design. When we're utilizing that data, if we're giving too much data at any given time, it actually can decrease somebody's ability to make a decision and move on or transact in the appropriate way.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I like your financial service example. So even just like a banking app where it's like, well, I just want to see how much money I've got. Often these banking apps is like they're full of data points and you have no idea what's going on really. So do you have any advice for like how you could go from something that just splurges data at you to something that is well designed and lets you take actions, maybe in the context of this like banking app or other financial app?
Absolutely. I think some of the worst offenders are so many of the stock analysis applications. And they often put out so much information and so much data, as opposed to really tailoring it to the task that any consumer or constituent, right, is actually trying to accomplish. Think about design as if I am somebody in financial services, I'm trying to give advice to someone, and I might be in my information taking in mode, right? What kinds of information do my clients need to have to make the appropriate investments within their portfolios? And often what you see is just a bombardment of trends, but never connecting those trends into truly actionable things that someone would say, you know what, hey, now's a good time to think about treasury bonds at a time when interest rates are high, right? It's bits and fragments of information, and what you're requiring the human brain to do is actually make connections that often the average consumer or the average investor are not qualified to make yet. And so By doing that, you create what's called cognitive overload. It literally shuts down our ability to make a decision. It's this analysis paralysis that people get into, and then you lose the user from actually having to transact. So that's an example of really bad, right? An example of a really good one, and I think banks have gotten much better at it, is understanding that it's always less about a transaction and much more about the things that we care about in our lives. And so what is the information I need to make a spending decision? What's the information I need to make a savings decision or an investment decision? And when you ask those questions, really interesting use cases and context comes to bear. And so then when you're able to serve that up at the right time, and let me say, like, my favorite is looking at a banking balance. If I'm in holiday shopping mode, which I believe so many of us are right now, kind of post the turkey hangover for those of you who are coming from the United States, globally, we're walking into the holidays and we're thinking about buying things for our loved ones to show gratitude, right? One of the things that you see is in banking applications, sometimes having that cognitive alert that, hey, you've just spent this amount. It's helping people make smarter decisions. Or my favorite, right, is being able to just open up my banking application or my credit card application to see what my balance is in relationship to my limit. Those are pieces of data that at a moment of purchase, I actually care about, and that people actually care about, and they use in a split second, within about a 3-second period, to make the decision whether or not they can afford to purchase something or not purchase something. And so I think that when we think about these things, these are cognitive habits that we have that sometimes they're so quick that we don't realize that we have them. So utilizing that data in kind of bite size, I kind of look at like cupcake sized snacks that enable decision making is really a great example of that.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, going back to your stock portfolio example, all you need to do is like know which things should I buy and which things should I sell, and it ought to be simpler.
In relationship to my financial goals, right? If I am I'm an empty nester, I'm no longer thinking about saving for college for my children. I'm in a very different mode than the couple that's in their 20s and thinking about their investment portfolio. Having that context and the information that I need to make a wiser choice given the goal, right? Not an absence of the goal, but given that goal, I think is really critical and important. And so surface only the information that you need me to do to make a transaction.
That seems really useful. And you've mentioned the word goal a few times here. So I'm wondering, like, you get a new design project, what are the sort of goals that are sort of specified up front?
It's actually some of the first work that we ever do when designing, whether it's a piece of hardware or a piece of software, is actually defining our customers' goals, right? The most important thing that I think that designers do is actually get out from behind the screens, move into the real world, and talk to customers. And so when you understand what your customers' goals are, and you begin to list all the assumptions that your multidisciplinary teams have, and then you bring them to a set of customers. One of the things that I love to do in that is actually listening to what their goals are, refining what our goals are, and beginning to marry the two. Because it is in defining a goal, I always think about a goal is defined by who is it we're designing for? What is it that we're going to do for them? Because to me, design is about not talking about the problem, but what are we going to do for them to solve the problem, right? And then what is the discernible wow of the experience? Is it that would be both measurable to the business or measurable to that constituent that you're designing for? So if I'm designing for a consumer, and today it takes 15 minutes to make a financial decision or transaction on, hey, I'd like to sell my Apple stock and put it into OpenAI, right? Or I'd like to move from oil stocks into renewables, right? Those are all kinds of decisions that you might want to make. Being able to help inform those decisions at those critical junctures, you don't know when people are having them if you never get out from behind your screen and actually ask them about it. And it's then bringing back those goals and using them as a North Star, right, in a vision to craft something that is both intelligent, but actually maybe reduces the time to task. So let me give you an example of a really good design goal, right? We can say, Richie, right, a early stage investor, right, wants to grow his savings and portfolio into less volatile stocks, right, and be able to do so in 2 minutes or less, right? I can measure 2 minutes or less. Today, it's taking him 15 minutes. Tomorrow, maybe 2 minutes or less. So how do we begin to craft that goal, right? And what is it that I said we want to enable for him? That middle piece of the what is, what are we enabling for him? And if you heard that goal, there wasn't one speak of data. There wasn't one part of it that talked about the design system that we're going to use or the colors that we're going to use. And there certainly wasn't anything technologically. So when you are freed of those, of those distractions, now we can get to beginning to apply what is the right technology and the right data to solve that problem.
So it really starts with, this is a customer problem we're trying to solve. And then after that, you figure out, well, we generate design goals from this. And I presume engineering teams are generating engineering goals as well. And then what, do design and engineering argue with each other? Like, how do you interact with, I guess, product teams as well? What's the dynamic there?
Well, I think one of the most important dynamics between all of us, and I think that there were everybody used to think about three disciplines to holding up like this holy trinity. And I think when we do that, we leave out our data scientists. The reality is, I think about it as design, engineering, data science, right? And our product managers. And sometimes those cross disciplines are organized a little bit differently, but the most important thing that we do is actually we bring them to the table, right? We bring them to the table and we debate whether or not, by kind of questioning ourselves through I call it the 5 whys, right? Is this the right problem for us to solve as a company, right? Are we the right people to not only solve this problem, but monetize the solve from this problem? And so when you have those questions, right, each of the disciplines doesn't do it in a silo. We bring everybody together in a cross-discipline team and do so in a way where we can come to and debate conclusions. I don't like the idea that designers argue with engineers, because I am both a designer and an engineer, right? As a design engineer, we can have good debates on the merits of whether or not it's a good idea or a bad idea, good technology or bad technology, whether or not we think there's going to be adoption. There should be debate, right? That's the friction in the design process that actually makes things better. And so when we bring that to that forum, the most important thing that we do is actually have healthy debate about every aspect about the how we will solve that problem together.
Okay, so as a designer and engineer, you get to argue with yourself, I guess. All right.
I certainly have, what I would say, actually, a lot of my time is spent translating languages, engineering speak to design speak and vice versa. One of the things, Richie, you and I talked about in kind of our early days, I said, I spend so much of my time sharing with designers the importance of the data that they're using as a core material. If they thought about it as this is an artistic craft, and aesthetic is important, but it isn't the only thing, right? It is whether or not it works. Design isn't just how it looks, it is how it works. And so if you understand how it works, you understand that data is a core component of the thing that you have to craft. So that's kind of number one that I share with design work. But I also spend time, how do they utilize artificial intelligence actually to make their customers' lives so much easier, and how they can use it as an assistant to them. Now let me flip over. And the design language, I got kind of the interpreter of imagination, right, to the engineers often is why we are utilizing the principles of human and cognitive science and bringing them to the table to help us make better decisions, so that what we actually engineer and imagineer together actually is going to get used. Because here's the deal: when people don't use it, both disciplines fail. And so often I see teams that are unable to speak each other's language. So by normalizing our lexicon and understanding the value that an engineer brings and the value that a designer brings, and the value that data science brings in helping us really model and frame up the right kind of data to consumers. And then, of course, I always think about great product managers, great product folks are great orchestrators. They got to get the band to play together well, right? And so much of that is the job of what I call orchestration. We all have to be playing the same song, and so much of that time is just ensuring that we're all speaking the same language. And so often we don't at our schools aren't necessarily teaching us that really critical collaboration skill.
That does seem so important, and it's something that we do at Data Camp. So for people who are just getting started with data, we try and teach them a lot of vocabulary so they can, just have conversations with other data professionals. And so I'm wondering, are there any bits of design, like jargon or terminology, that you just think are kind of fundamental and people should know about?
Absolutely. So when I think a little bit about design jargon or design, buzzwords, the first one is being human obsessed. People say, what does that mean? What is human centered versus maybe engineering centered or technical or technically centered? It is what exactly it says. Human centered actually takes the principles of human behavior, right? Our mental models, and bring them to what it is we're actually, particularly in the area of software. I think about mental models as so critical to the design process in human-centered design. In the area of industrial design, when you're designing things like hardware, ergonomics and the importance of comfort and the importance of usage and how we sit in a chair and whether or not that's comfortable for long periods of time, all of those tend to be design jargon. Color, design systems, right? Color is important. Color actually helps us often differentiate the importance of information and or data in a hierarchical interface. One of my kind of favorite ones is around design systems, is actually sharing in that design systems shouldn't be just designed by the design department, but we have to bring engineers into this so that our design is codified into components, right? That are repeatable, right? When we create something that is useful and usable, one of the things you can do is understand that the importance of that pattern that we have created in someone's life needs to often be repeated in other areas. And so being able to apply design systems in the appropriate way. So what we are doing is focusing in on the things that we, like getting the things that we've learned out to the public, and then focusing in on some of the other design problems, which maybe the design system hasn't quite figured out yet. And so the importance of things is design systems in and of themselves are products, right? A design system is a set of components and tools that the entire team should be able to use to really try to solve a software problem.
The idea of having repeated stuff does seem incredibly important. I mean, just like as an Englishman who lives in the United States, just driving on the other side of the road, like there was a switch there. It confused me. I spent years nearly getting run over crossing the road until I learned the other way. Yeah. Okay. So beyond that, I'd like to have just some success stories, if you think, like examples of data products or AI products that you think are just really well designed. Can you give me some examples there?
Well, I have to say, shamelessly plugging, that we have a really unique one that was launched in 2014, and her name's Alexa. And she sits on top of a very large, started with NLP and sits on top of a large language model. that has been completely revamped, revolutionized. And she's become people's at-home assistant. And that's a very powerful and personal thing, to invite an assistant into your home. And I think one of the things that has been really incredible about it is that I think we as humans forget how much we anthropomorphize machines. And just a common kind of everyday example of that is that in the United States, 8 out of every 10 people names their car, right? And so when you understand that, you understand that we might have a name for our car, and we're giving it all these intelligent things that it did, but maybe it didn't have AI connected to it. And so one of the things that I think that I have really enjoyed seeing is the evolution of bringing in AI into mobility, right? Assistance into mobility. So that's a really good example of something really done, because at a time when we are at a cognitive state, we're actually operating a machine. And so to have an AI assistant help reduce that cognitive load and bring delight to what often is a transaction. For those of you that are from New York, you will understand that driving is not our first behavior that we enjoy. And some of us are really not good at it, especially me. I choose, when I do choose to drive, the first thing I do is I flip on my Alexa Auto, enable it, because one of the things that she can do is help me with directions. One of the things that she can do is read my text to me, tell me, whether or not it's going to be 20 degrees colder in the Hudson Valley. So that's really important things that help me make everyday decisions. The other one I think is a really important one actually has been the evolution of some of the design tools that have been created. Midjourney is a wonderful example of, it is so simple. It sits in a chat interface on Discord, right? And the ability to imagine a scenario and say text to something, right? The text to something is something that's really incredible because we have now started to democratize having to have command of the command line in code and in Python, right, to everyday language. And I think what's really exciting to me is seeing the voice aspect starting to be layered on top of that, right? Because when while text is fantastic, we as humans, our very natural capability, the majority of us, is voice, is our speech. And so being able to marry those things together, I think we're going to see, we've got a long road ahead of us in going from text interfaces to speech interfaces, and being able to lighten the cognitive load on any particular consumer and just about any interface. But that's some of the most exciting work that I'm seeing in the arena today. Some of the stuff that I think is it's a little hyped, right, is where you're still having to see significant amount of human intervention, particularly in the area of generative. One of the things, and I think our engineering audiences, maybe our data science audiences can appreciate, is that one of the things I'm always asked is that, God, will we be able to to text to develop an iOS app or an Alexa skill? And the answer is yes, you can do those things, right? But all that it's really today so far that it's creating, so the vast majority of systems that I have seen tend to only focus in on maybe the front end architecture, as opposed to all the necessary components and the connections to APIs and data sources that you would need. Now, that doesn't mean that in a 5-year period, we won't see that accelerate. But today, I think there's a long way to go. A long way to go in terms of having something replace engineers or data science or even designers for that matter. I think there's a lot of fear in the water. And I think a part of overcoming that fear is actually getting your hands dirty with some of the many products that have come to us. Everything from image creation to writing text to basic productivity or creating websites, or even the GitHub Copilot's kind of one of my favorite tools, or even AlphaCode, right? Or even development of music and audio. there's still some real core fundamentals that you still have to know about those disciplines to actually get the output that you want. So I spend a lot of time really focusing on prompt engineering and understanding the underlying tools that these were actually developed on.
Okay, yeah. So that domain knowledge, that domain expertise isn't going away. If you want to sort of make the most of AI, then you've got to combine the AI bonus like with your own knowledge. I agree that things like Midjourney and the other image generation tools are amazing. And I just go back to the thing you were saying about Alexa, because it is a huge, it's what sold, I don't know, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of units. Like had a real big impact. Can you talk me through some of the design decisions you made when you were working on that? Like, as want to know how your brain thinks about like design choices.
Yeah. So let me start by saying there are 100 design choices that go into almost every skill. Similar to, I think there's ethical choices that we often consider that are really critical in the development of a personal assistant that has the luxury of sitting in people's homes, often in their kitchens, sometimes on their bedside tables, even in their bathrooms. If you think a little bit about it, if I kind of just let me zoom back out for a second. If we think about Alexa very much Alexa is the assistant that sits at the application layer. We have a compute layer, right? These are semiconductors, chips, chip makers, right? The inference. Then you have your foundational model layers. This is, folks like Amazon and Alexa, right, on the foundational model, which was those large language models of all the use cases that we do in the home. But Amazon isn't the only player, right? You've got folks like Stability AI and Google Bard and Hugging Face and Vibes AI. And then you have the application layer, right? The actual interface, the part that the human interfaces with the most, be it Alexa, Siri, Vibes, right? Chat, GPT, Jasper, right? Those are all interfaces. And so when we think about Alexa as an interface, her primary interface that was coming through in the early days as smart speakers, then when we opened it up to screens, was actually how do we think about what people need in voice? And one of the things that we found often was that our cognitive limits of what we can remember will sometimes limit all of the different usages that you could have with her. So some of the design decisions might be what would be a kind of a hero function. Let me start with something like one of the areas that I worked on, which was in fitness. And what was really interesting was that in all the world, are we going to start replacing fitness coaches? And I said, no, maybe not necessarily about the fitness coach, but where we need to really focus in on people that are concerned about their health at a time when we were all concerned about our health. And I think we have a new understanding of our health and the importance of it is how do we get you from sedentary, right, to maybe a casual fitness. I'm not going to make you Michael Jordan, right? I'm not going to make you LeBron. Nike does that really well. Like there's other assistants out there that are going to do it well. But in creating Alexa, it was where do we think that we could have the broadest impact? And what are kind of some of the habits that you would utilize and trust us for? In the kitchen, that's also very true. Everything from recipes to playing music and being entertained, right? Those are all very broad use cases, but some of the design decisions that went into it really focused in on an area that I have called cognitive experience design. And cognitive experience design really takes into account some core things. One is that cognitive experience design is that you plainly explain to your consumer, right, how it's working, whether or not the product or service, how we came to a decision or a conclusion, a projection or a prediction. Or one, kind of my favorite things was actually around privacy, right? I think smart design starts, from the privacy of the individual who's communicating with it and how we handle the data with stakeholders and how they interact or, directly or indirectly with data. And so one of the key decisions in that was understanding both the lack of privacy laws and then globally the importance of privacy laws in other areas, and then looking at limited and really keeping in when it came to data is which data was important to surface up to the consumer at any given time. And the most important part of this was and enabling users to actually delete their data upon their human request. And so really enabling people to take hold of their data and information was something so critical in the design of how we did those things. Her tone of voice, right? That's an example of, we think about interfaces, right? You immediately think about visual interfaces, but in a voice interface, an Alexa with an attitude isn't necessarily what people want at a moment of crisis when you can't find your keys or you need to unlock the door, or I tend to use it. I don't think I can remember the last time I've turned off a light at night. When I tell Alexa good night, the fact that she tells me good night back was a design decision, right? It was a design decision to say, I gotcha. Not only did I turn off the lights, but go get some rest, right? And so bringing those human, those human artifacts into her personality and doing so in a way that removed complexity from people's lives is truly, I think, the core of what we did and why there are over 100 million devices that are controlling billions of other devices out there. And I think one of the most exciting things it's about kind of where the Echo shows are going next. And I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to see the most recent launch of the Alexa products, but in the Echo Show 8 and their latest earbuds, being able to have full conversation as opposed to command-based, right? Now enabling those large language models to have a conversation. And I will tell you a little bit about the insight behind that one. During the pandemic, one of the things that we saw repeatedly, right, was, and we even heard about it and was written in newspapers, was about isolation equal people's sense of loneliness. And we certainly saw people turning to their smart devices to begin to want to have conversations with them. And one of the things that I think was so critical is understanding is like, how did we need to put together an inclusive team that empowered and like kind of respectfully enabled people to have conversations of dignity with a machine. Understanding that sometimes when you're having those conversations, you're suffering from loneliness. And so to be able to serve the purpose of resolving that loneliness with human beings, or being the most, the most essential assistant in your house at a time when maybe you were alone in your home, was a really critical feature for us. And so, those are the kinds of design decisions and conversations that we had around our tables and on Chime at Amazon at a time when the very basic function of caring for our customers was the first order of business, and how Alexa could help be more caring for those customers, whether they were ordering something from Whole Foods to be delivered, whether they were reordering toilet paper or wipes or masks, or being able just to tell a joke tell me a joke at a really critical time was, I think, some of the most rewarding work that I've done in my career.
Absolutely. And it just seemed like the sort of the marketing idea of having like a brand voice or some kind of consistent tone of voice is even more important once you get into AI and chatbots, digital assistants, because then it's not just a tone, it's like it's a whole personality. And me and Alexa would probably be fun for 5 minutes, but I think the joke would wear thin like pretty quickly.
Totally. It would be like a bad guest you'd invited to the party. And we have to think about it. It's like, the more that we understand that we as human beings and consumers anthropomorphize our technology, right? Just as we did with the car and give it a name, when it begins to speak back to you, you have to understand that we have now given it a human interface. And that very human interface, think about it as I looked at it very much as we are a guest in your home, And so how might I behave as a guest in your home who is in service to you?
And so you've given some examples of like good sort of design practices then. I'm worried, like, are there any like flip sides to this? Like, what are the sort of the bad things that are common that you ought to avoid in terms of design?
It's kind of, there's a couple things, which is understanding your place in people's lives. Often we as designers, one of the things that we're really good at is imagination. We have phenomenal imagination. By the way, all disciplines have wonderful imagination. They're wonderful practitioners that I like to think that from a design perspective, those of us have great imaginations. It's understanding when something is right for your customer, right? And discerning that a part of that is not all driven by data, right? It isn't all driven by data. Data can help to inform that, but as a team, you've got to sometimes work on your gut as to whether or not a public is prepared to socially adapt to something that could be perceived as a threat to them. And we have to remember that, is that today there is so much of a hype cycle going on around artificial intelligence. And a part of that hype cycle is because when we don't understand things as human beings, we immediately become fearful and then apathetic. And we're still at a core piece, I think a core important part of generative artificial intelligence, which is derived out of machine learning, right? We think about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is very broad, right? We talked about kind of the different levels of how the marketplace has organized itself. But all the different technologies, right? If we dive into the area of generative, it's the one that feels the most human-like right now. And so in that arena, it is really, I think, incumbent upon teams to focus in on what are the true value that they're going to deliver to their customers, and whether or not they're the right people to deliver that value, and where do you partner with other companies or partner with or collaborate with different disciplines to bring the total value. And let me give you a kind of a real life example of that, where I've seen, great big experiments fail. Is when you have a grand vision, but you're not able to create a most lovable product out of it. I don't mean a minimum viable product. A minimally viable product means it works, but whether or not who it works for is, I think, the most important question. And so when I think about it, it is really trying to apply the lens of the customers we're designing these features and functions or services or pieces of software for need to be able to love what we've created for them. And that love is shown through repeat usage, not just usage for the first week, but it's usage 10 weeks from now and 100 weeks from now, and seeing how it evolves and understanding that if you try to cut, really chew off too much, sometimes I love the iPhone example, right? When the iPhone was introduced to us, the features of it were a phone. It was an evolution from the iPod. It played music and it had a browser on it, right? We had this interesting little thing, a store, but the store didn't have a whole lot in it. Those were like the three most lovable features. And I think this is where teams must come together to debate what the right most lovable features are for consumers. Because very easily you could go, I've got to develop this whole like iPhone, right? The internet, all the different features and functions and things like that. When you try to boil the ocean, what you get is dead fish, right? And I think this is a really important lesson, and that when we looked at the people that boiled the ocean, and Nokia, who is a phenomenal company, I have had the luxury of working with them and working on their brand and working on their store, tried to boil the ocean, whereas the iPhone went bit by bit, right? Feature by feature, consumer and insight by consumer insight, and brought us features that made our lives a little bit easier. And they didn't overwhelm us with it. They introduced them over time, and they made us love them even a little bit more. So that's an example of good vis-a-vis bad, and where these things fall apart, because you ask yourself, from a monetary standpoint, where does the Nokia App Store stand in comparison to the iPhone or even the Android store, right? And business results, when in a customer-obsessed environment, your business results are tied to your customer obsession. And when your customers are happy, they will have repeat business with you. And that is really the core of great design in the business world, right? Creates customer love that invites repeat usage. And that repeat usage can be measured and monetized.
That does seem to be an incredibly important sort of theme throughout the session. Is just that you need to worry about like what do your customers care about, not just like what features can I build. All right, I'd like to talk a bit about skills before we finish. So for data people who are sort of curious about design, like where do you get started?
Yeah, so let me start with, I think it's an interesting time to be thinking about design, and there are a lot of places to get skills. One of the first things that I actually often share with data folks, even engineers, product folks, teachers, right, in schools, as I get the opportunity of working with teachers who are teaching our next generation, the most important science, technology, engineering, arts, math, and design skills, right? So where do you start with the design, right? Which is, what is the framework for problem solving? Design thinking in its very concept, right, as kind of codified by the Stanford D School, but has evolved over time, is probably one of the best places to start. There are lots of tools and frameworks that you're able to upskill yourself on just understanding how do we think about design sprints, right? How do we merge design sprints and engineering sprints together? IBM's a really phenomenal resource for this. They worked on, in my days there, enterprise design thinking, right? Codifying it from the consumer design thinking to the enterprise design thinking and applying that design thinking to the constituents inside of an enterprise, right? Who are the people who are you are going to serve with this idea? And so really educating yourself in the methods of design thinking is kind of the first way of going about it. Then the next way, and I think this is a really interesting one, is actually understanding the tools that are available to you, right? And one of the things in the area of data is you'll see there's a lot of data and design overlap in our tools. Today, I'm able to bring in a tremendous amount of data into interfaces, right? Without ever having to stitch any code together, whether that be in Figma, whether that be in Framer, right? These are all prototyping tools, visual design prototyping tools or architecture tools. And so that's a really good start for folks that are interested. And then I think one of the things that I love to have data folks do is actually go into some of the tools like Midjourney, like ChatGPT. Ask ChatGPT, utilizing your foundational design thinking skills, ask it to put together a specific customer journey. One of the things it does really well today is actually helps to give you a framework that you can work along with to be able to kind of fill in the gaps of your own knowledge around what people have published out there and what today. So hopefully those are some key things. So if we think about start with your design thinking, it's still very relevant. Matter of fact, one of the things that I love doing, a part of the design core, is actually bringing artificial intelligence into the design thinking process, right? To help us get to different stages and maybe different outcomes by asking different ways we prompt a ChatGPT or a Midjourney or any one of the hundreds of, DALL-E, StyleGANs, you name it, right? Browse AI or Cody, Bardeen. Those are just examples of like where you can begin to utilize generative AI in the design thinking framework, right? While still being very human about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, certainly design thinking seems like a very important framework for how you go about doing any of this. My experience with design thinking is like it's a lot of fun, but like so many post-it notes everywhere. I don't know if that's still a thing. So that seems like a useful skill for people to pick up on. I think one area where design and data do interact a lot is with things like data visualization, so plotting, and then also dashboards. I'm just wondering whether you have any advice for like what people need to know to get better at designing their plots and dashboards.
So here's what I would tell you. what is it you're trying to accomplish with your data visualization? Go back and ask the question is, who is the data visualization for? I think so often in data visualization, one of the things that we make this mistake of is that it all needs to be visualized. And so one of the things I try to implore designers to do is actually sit with our data folks and actually get to what are the decisions that need to be made in a data visualization? And does this visualization, right, do a better job than simply showing them the number? Often, like banking apps is a really good example of how complex data visualization increased cognitive load over decreasing cognitive load. That instead of just showing them, here's what your balance is, right, versus here's what your here's where you are at your spend limit. So these are things that sometimes you just have to get through from learning together. The other part in terms of, I think you touched on like even just the interface. Let's talk about data visualization as an interface, right? Which goes back to that fundamental question of who is this for? What is the problem that this data is attempting to solve for? And there are plenty of design tools out there, like Diagram and UI Design.ai, and there's a Figma.ai text, right? All great examples of design tools that are helping visualize or give new life to data visualizations within interfaces.
Okay, that seems like good advice. Now, before we wrap up, is there anything that you're working on at the moment that you particularly excited about?
I am. There's a number of things. So let me just start with the Design Core and a real plug for the Design Core. So the Design Core is actually a group of individuals that I was able to bring together in 2019 and has continued to grow into a global network, right, to upskill and reskill both women and minority communities in science, technology, engineering, arts, math, and design, thinking about going from STEM to STEAM. Why? Because the most important technical skills that you're seeing that you need are creativity, right, and problem solving. And so we need to ensure that our schools are outputting what industry needs. And so really going and really challenging the learning frameworks on the area of upskilling and bringing these disciplines, as opposed to siloed disciplines, bringing them together in a world where the biological and the digital are very quickly, right, fusing together. Thinking about science and art as not competitive to each other, but as something that need each other. Engineering and design, something that need each other. So we do a lot of skills training. And when you go to designbyus.com/donate, one of the things that's so critical in what we're doing today is actually we're going into high schools. And we're going into high schools enabling teachers to be able to teach how to utilize AI technology in classrooms, right? There's a lot of concern and fear in the water and even banning of AI in school systems. And I actually think that is absolutely the wrong thing to do, not because I'm selling an AI platform, but because what we are going to very quickly see within the next 5 years is the difference between the haves and the have-nots are going to the people who can work with AI and the people who don't have access to intelligence. And so let us not create another inequity behind fear, and actually bring these disciplines together, train teachers, right? And then create after-school programs and boot camp programs that are free and available to public schools that need our help across the globe, right? In enabling people to utilize AI to solve problems in their communities. The only way that we're going to get to a diverse, equitable, and inclusive society is actually when we bring more of these people to the table. And teachers, if we think about teachers, they are our first line of both defense, and let's remember, they're educating our future workforce. And so we need to equip them today, right, versus tomorrow. And so much of the work that the Design Core is actually going into schools, creating these pilot programs. We're working with a school today, actually, that I'm so excited about, Mesa, which is a in Bushwick, Brooklyn, where this past summer, we taught the teachers design thinking and artificial intelligence, and we gave them the necessary tools that they needed to bring them in to boot camps for students that we are encouraging to become the next tech entrepreneurs and utilize those same frameworks to create new technology businesses that help really solve community problems. And so for me, that's some of the most rewarding work. And the last thing I'll talk about is Vibes AI. Vibes AI is actually a new artificial intelligence and sensory computing company that I am a co-founder of. And we are really focused on bringing humanity back to computing in a way that really unites us with nature and the importance of joyful health and bringing that joyful health to people through new types of smart devices in the world. So those are the areas that I am the most excited about today.
Okay, community and joyful health, those sound like useful things to be working on. Excellent. So thank you so much, Joanna. We're going to go to audience questions in a moment. For anyone who does have a question for Joanna, please do add them in the comment section. We'll have a brief interlude to talk about upcoming webinars because we've got a lot coming on soon. So tomorrow there is a session on combining large language models, your generative AI, with knowledge graphs, very useful in a business context. And then next week on Tuesday, we've got a code along on building a diffuser model with PyTorch. On Wednesday, there's a career session on breaking into data analytics. And then on Friday, the 8th, there's a session on how to manage different teams because data science and analytics is very much a cross-functional team sport at the moment. So please do go to datacamp.com/webinars, sign up for those. All right, there is a question from an anonymous LinkedIn user saying, are there any universal tools you would say have become must-have for analysts? I know AI has been a game changer for productivity and efficiency. Well, I don't know whether you want to include design tools in there because since that's more your forte.
Well, I think, let me start with, there's a ton of tools out there for analysts. Particularly in the area of productivity. And I think siphoning off which data, and again, I kind of go back to the place of how do I present that data and how do I make that data improve productivity. Browse AI, Cody, Bardeen are in the area of productivity. On the presentation side, Tome.app, Beautiful.ai, and Sleds.ai are phenomenal ways to be able to look at data in different ways. We talked a little bit about some of the ways that we think about dashboards. Guys, dashboards, somebody's making decisions off that dashboard. So think about a dashboard as an interface, right? It is a product. And so you have to understand what is it that people are really trying to get out of a dashboard? What are the decisions that people need to make? And so when I think about analysis, it is what is the specific analysis that someone is attempting to do. And most people out of analysis are trying to synthesize information and then develop actionable insights, right? So that you can react off of a piece of information. And those tools certainly can help you get there.
Absolutely. I think just to sort of build on that, pretty much every data platform, AI is being built into it at this point. So it's going to be everywhere in a few years' time. All right. With that, it seems we're fairly quiet on the audience questions front, and we are past time now. So I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you once again, Joanna. Really, really informative, exciting stuff. Thank you to Reese for moderating. Thank you to everyone who showed up today. I hope to see you all again in future webinars. All right. Goodbye.